Hey everybody, my name is Tracy Brown and I am the founder of Stained Glass Spirit, and I want to welcome you to this episode of the From Hatred to Harmony Live Summit. Oh, how fabulous is it? I get to talk to 11 people today about the spiritual foundation for moving from hatred to harmony, the spiritual foundation for focusing on ending racism, the spiritual foundation for anti-racism work. And in this episode, in this session, I get to spend 30 minutes that I know are going to go really, really fast with Dr. Petra Weldes from CSL Dallas. And I feel so blessed to be able to spend this time with Dr. Petra for many reasons. One, you cannot have a conversation with Petra Weldes without learning something. Two, you cannot have a conversation with Petra Weldes without thinking, without being inspired to think and maybe think differently about something. And three, because Petra Weldes is one of my go-to spiritual leaders. So I get to hang out with her, and in 30 minutes, we're going to cram as much as we can in. Now, Dr. Petra, out of respect, but from this point on in the conversation, Petra?
Absolutely. Please.
I've decided, because we only have 30 minutes, that I'm not doing bios for everybody, although we'll go back and we'll post some biographical information for people who aren't present live.
Right.
But here's what I'm saying to everyone. People are going to know so much about you based on what you share in the 30 minutes, right? Everything they need to know is going to come out in this conversation. So the question I want to start with is, why is having this conversation important to you? You said yes to the invitation. So why is talking about the spiritual foundation of ending or interrupting racism important to you?
Well, two reasons. One, because it is it's something that needs to be healed in our culture, period, end of sentence, right? It's just not okay for it to continue this way. And two, because I believe that science of mind and metaphysics has a unique way of engaging with the topic and with healing racism. And because of the work that we do with unconscious bias, with beliefs, with the internal framework, which is, of course, the cornerstone of the external systemic racism that we see. And so, and I guess three, really, quite frankly, three, let's just say, I believe our spirituality has to have real impact in the world and in our, and not just in our lives. And so in metaphysics and in the science of mind, we don't withdraw to the ashram or the hermitage just to do our consciousness work. We do our consciousness work, but it should inform and support our work in the world. These two things are intimately linked, and it should make a difference in how we engage in the world. And so for all of those reasons, plus I love you, and anything you ask me to do, I'm going to say yes to, Tracy. So it's just really, I don't mean, really, you want to talk about, whatever. But this is a particularly, just super important, super important. And can you believe we're still having this conversation at the beginning of the 21st century? Sometimes some of the conversations we're still having, I'm thinking, what? Why are we, what? But it's up to be healed. So let's do it.
Exactly. And that is, it's like really, I must be on the planet at this time to be a part of the solution. Yeah. Right. And so I can't look back and say, oh, this should have been healed, or this should have been done 20 years ago, or 100 years ago, or 400 years ago. In fact, it never, ever even should have begun.
Right.
Okay, that may all well be an intellectual exercise, and it may be lowercase t true, but it is happening. It is occurring. It is now, and I am here.
Yes, yes, exactly. And we're here for a reason, right? We're here in exactly this time and place to provide our gift and our consciousness to moving humanity forward. And yeah, and to not engage would be, to my way of thinking, not honoring the fact that we are embodied souls. We don't live in a purely spiritual world, and we don't live in a purely mental world. We actually live in the space-time continuum. This is our playground of expression. And for God's sakes, could we just learn that, you know, when you're sitting in the sandbox, you don't throw things at each other. You don't take away, right? You know, it's mine, you can't have it. I mean, really, are you kidding? That's what, you know, that's what toddlers do. That's what 3-year-olds do. And if this is our spiritual playground to really understand the power of choices and that we're here to express our gifts and talents, I mean, that's one of my favorite metaphors. This is our sandbox. And like children, we are learning the consequences of behaviors and choices and how they play out. And over time, right, we mature in our understanding of our oneness and what does it mean to be in the sandbox together, as opposed to saying, well, this is my corner of the sandbox, I'm going to play however I want. And you know, humanity is young and we're growing, and it's time.
And in the sandbox, not only am I going to do whatever I want, but the way we've been playing in the sandbox is, and you must play the way that I decide you must play.
Yes.
Right.
Right. Right.
It's insanity.
Yes.
But it is that it's not even, I'm going to take my toys from the sandbox and go home and leave you alone. It's like, no, you are required to stay here and you are required to play by my rules.
Right.
I mean, that's the structure of
Yes.
racism.
Yes. Which gives absolutely no value to the fact that you might actually want to play differently. And we could actually play differently together, and it might actually be super cool what comes up. No, this is my sandbox and you must play in it this way. But, you know, and if you don't, I'm going to sit you in the corner or whatever, beat you up, whatever I'm going to do to you. I mean, it's just nonsense, right? And we see it. Children may be innocent, but, you know, they are actually still children, and they need to be educated, socialized, civilized, and our consciousness needs to be educated and civilized into this deeper spiritual reality that we're actually one. That it's our collective sandbox. Exactly. That we're playing in, right? And everybody and everything adds. And we need that. We need that to, deal with some of the other issues that we're facing.
So I know that you, like me, you like to play with words and you really take language seriously and stop and think about it. So when I was developing the title for this summit, and I ended up with the Spiritual Foundation for Anti-Racism Work, I really, I wrote and rewrote and took that out, and I moved it and I changed it like 8 times. Right. And went back to it because in general, I don't do anti anything.
Right.
Right. I'm not fighting against something. I want to focus on what I'm changing toward.
Right.
Which the title of the summit, let's move from hatred to the spiritual attributes of harmony, the way harmony was designed. But I left it in because right now it's such a anti-racism. It's such a popular keyword that people are latching on to, that it's not enough to just want to not be racist. I have to choose to be anti-racist. Yeah. And so in our popular culture right now, I knew it would mean something to people who I wanted to participate.
Right.
But I love that when you were talking, you said we need to heal racism. And so just kind of, I don't know, it just strikes me as something to maybe talk about for 2 or 3 minutes about what's the difference, what's the similarity and what's the difference, or just even what it means to you, the difference between doing anti-racism work and healing racism.
Okay, that's a really great question. So, when I think about healing anything, I think about healing the underlying belief systems, right? The unconscious, subconscious set of beliefs that have somehow become accepted as the norm. And we might call it the shadow, we might call it our, subconscious mind. It's just a set of belief systems that we've decided are true. And so healing racism is, to me, it's identical to healing my false belief that I'm separate, or that I'm not good enough, or that I'm a victim, or that I'm whatever, right? Those are, so the healing work happens in consciousness. To me, anti-racism is then how I show up in my behavior. It's how I show up in the world, right? And yeah, and it's always the, Mother Teresa, she made that famous statement, don't ask me to come to an anti-war protest, but a peace protest or a peace march I'll come to. And I know that in science of mind and metaphysics, people can get a little wigged out, don't use the word not. And, it's like, okay, could we just not be superstitious? Really, honest to God, right? Let's not be like, could we understand what anti-racism means? It is a behavior that seeks to disrupt racist behavior. And if there is anything that metaphysics does, is it disrupts patterns. Right? Patterns. So the healing is the disruption of the inner patterns, whether they're the individual pattern or the collective belief system, right? Because systemic racism that is an outward form is simply the form of the inner causal belief system that has been created over time, right? And so these two things go together. And I just, I have to tell you, when I read the book Anti-Racist, and I can't remember the gentleman's name, and there was something about the way that whole thing was framed that all of a sudden I could get a hold of, oh my God, right? Because it's not, because the other side of that coin is so easily, it becomes an us and them, and people who were them now become us, and then the other us is now them. You know what I mean? And it's just the changing of positions of power, and who's in power and who's not, and the oppressors. So the oppressed so often become the oppressors. That there was something about anti-racism, like altogether, that was so empowering to me. That I really, I like, yeah. And I too, I really believe in the be for something and not against something, but I also am not going to be superstitious about a particular word. I have been known to use the word not in my spiritual work. This is not the truth.
Exactly. That demand for, that denial of power to that which is out of alignment requires focus and energy, and like there is no wiggle room, right?
Yeah.
And so that was lovely, because I agree that we need to know what we're talking about and be focused on it, and not be superstitious, to use that language. And I think a lot of people in metaphysics, a lot of people in New Thought, whatever the denomination is, get so caught up in the limited understanding, or the surface level understanding, that they're not able to see. And you really, one of the things that came out of that conversation just now for me is delineating between beliefs and behaviors. Mm-hmm. Right? And so our beliefs are invisible until they become evidenced by our behavior. Yes. And so the language we use to describe our beliefs, and the process that we use to build or dismantle beliefs, is by design. It needs to be different, yes, than what we talk about and how we frame what we do in our behavior.
Yes. Yes. And that's why I think, I mean, we've seen it time and time and time again, and we've seen it in our own lives. Just addressing behavior is not enough. Sometimes we can address behavior, and by changing the behavior, the internal shift in consciousness happens. There's no question about it. But without the willingness to shift the internal consciousness, then the shift in behavior is lip service. Right? And it doesn't work, and it doesn't last, because behavior is only an effect of the internal cause of the belief systems. And so we have to work at both levels at the same time. And when we point to behavior and say that has to change, we're really showing we're evidencing the unconscious causal belief system that is being reflected in that behavior, and saying this, no, not just the behavior because it's not right, but because it is out picturing such a faulty idea. Black people don't matter, they don't count, so we can shoot them. Hello. So while addressing police brutality as a behavior, as a systemic, we're going to teach you to be de-escalating and blah, 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 and all that, which is fabulous. However, if the people who get that training don't shift the underlying consciousness that they have about Black people, and when push comes to shove, the training is not going to win out. It's always the consciousness and the belief system that comes forward, right? And so these two things have to work absolutely in concert with each other. We can't just do one, and quite frankly, we can't just do the other. We can't also just go, oh, I'm going to sit at home and change my belief system, and then it doesn't matter how I behave in the world. No, the behavior now does. But it's a little more effortless to change the behavior, because behavior is the outpicturing of the beliefs. So as I'm working on those internal things, right, then it's a little more, I may be used to being forceful in behavior, right, but I've been trained to de-escalate, and my inner belief system and consciousness is already shifting. It's now easier for me to pick up that training and go, oh, where I might have used force in the past. You know what I mean? So it's, right, they have to go together.
Yeah, we need both, because we live with both, and unfortunately, so often our behavior is reflecting beliefs that we didn't consciously choose.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so we have to become aware of them and change them to change the behavior, or use the behavior to build a new belief. I mean, it works both ways.
Right.
And it's so in alignment with what we have been taught, right? And what we teach in terms of shifting your own individual lives. Somehow, a lot of people in metaphysics assume it is just for their individual lives, as if their individual lives are not contributing to the collective consciousness and the collective life of all. So yeah, I know that you have something to say about that. In fact, even earlier you said we don't teach a philosophy or a spirituality where you go up to the ashram and you separate yourself from the world in order to develop or demonstrate that you have enlightenment.
Right.
So talk about that, building the bridge between using the principles in our individual lives and how that is not a separate thing from the responsibility to contribute to the collective.
Well, let me rephrase your statement, Tracy.
Please.
It's not that we have a responsibility to the collective, like as if that were different from the responsibility we have to our own lives, right? If it's one mind, if it's one infinite mind, and if every time we think we're using the oneness of the infinite mind, then by definition, when I am working with my own subjective consciousness and the beliefs that are lodged in there, so many of which I have absorbed from my culture and my family and the people around me that I've unconsciously taken on, those belief systems are in the field, right? It's the same belief that is in the collective field. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious, right? And Ernest Holmes calls it the subjective mind. New Thought understands this. And so what we have to understand is that when we don't take responsibility for healing the unconscious biases within ourselves, we are not contributing to the healing of that larger systemic human consciousness, the morphogenetic field, Rupert Sheldrake calls it. And so it's not that we're responsible for healing the collective as if that were separate, right? Our responsibility is to pay attention to consciousness, period, end of sentence. And every time that we are paying attention to the collective consciousness, and we're asking ourselves, where am I with that? What am I thinking about that? Right? We are recognizing that, and every time that I do that within my own self and recognizing that that is affecting the whole, right? I'm living in oneness. To have the belief that I'm going to just do this work for myself in my own life, thinking that it's not going to have an impact on anybody else is the height of dualism in the sense of separation, right? As if I were somehow a separate entity who could do my own healing, and y'all could you just get about your life? Like, could you just heal yourself and figure it out? Like, if it's truly a oneness, what I have to understand is that whatever is going on in my consciousness is at the same time going on in the collective consciousness, and I must take responsibility for that. My life is impacting because we are one. And so it's not like I have to now take responsibility for the collective. I have to take responsibility for the fact that I am always engaged with the collective, period. And so my responsibility is the same. It's right. I'm responsible for how my unconscious beliefs and behaviors show up. And my unconscious beliefs show up as behaviors, and I'm responsible for how my unconscious beliefs are a part of that whole one set of, again, as I said, Rupert Sheldrake calls it the morphogenetic field, which I think is a very powerful restatement of Carl Jung's collective unconscious. And that we share that field, and we're contributing to it all the time. Let us, just like in our own lives, we want to make all that stuff conscious. Let's become conscious of the fact that we are contributing to that all the time. You can't turn it off. Therefore, you can't turn it on either, right? You're not responsible for turning it on. You're responsible for your impact in it. That's what I think about that.
So I was smiling as I was listening to you because, I'm doing my best to ask questions in the framework that people ask me the question, or that I hear people talking about the question. And so, yeah, you didn't disappoint me because because I was like, that's how a lot of people who are just really kind of going a little bit beneath the surface, that's how they're thinking about this, right? About, I'm here and I don't want to have anything, or I'm not responsible for, or I'm not there. And it's like there is one universe.
Right.
There is one universe, and there is no way to separate from it unless you are living in the delusion that you can do something over here and you're just in your little bubble.
And we teach so deeply personal responsibility in New Thought. How can you not take responsibility for the fact that you are causal in life? And that our belief systems are causal, and they are not just causal personally, but they are contributing to the causal nature of consciousness as a whole for humanity. And I have to take responsibility for that. And I have to take responsibility for the fact that there's a whole boatload of stuff back there that I am not aware of. I mean, holy mackerel, just, I just have to use my own personal life as an example of all the things that have over time I've been made aware of. Like, oh, I didn't know I thought that. Oh, I didn't know wow, I didn't know that was still running me, right? Well, if that's happening to me as an individual expression, then that's happening to us as the collective expression of humanity. So can I say something about, sorry.
Yes.
Okay, you had asked, think about if there was a point or anything that we wanted to make, and then you had talked about words. Can I just say something about a word that I have spent a lot of time in the last 3 days thinking about because of this conversation we were having?
Yes.
And I think for me, it's part of the spiritual foundation for doing this work. Because I am no longer practicing the Christian faith, I do not resonate with, look at those poor marginalized people, we have to help them. And I have really spent some time with this term marginalized. And the spiritual foundation for doing this work is, for me, the whole notion that there are marginalized people that we should help, to me, is the height of arrogance. And it's not that there are marginalized people that need to be helped. It's that it's impossible in oneness for any people to be allowed to be marginalized. So it's not that marginalized people need to be helped. It's that we have to heal the idea that it is okay for anybody, for Black people in the US to be marginalized, for people of color, but in specifically racism with Black people, African Americans, that the framework, these are marginalized people that need to be helped. Okay, I've spent a lot of time thinking about that in the last 3 days, and what an extraordinarily arrogant point of view that is. And that when we really understand oneness, I don't even get why this is even a conversation. If we totally get that we're oneness, it would be impossible to say, well, these people are less than, they're over there somewhere, Yeah, so I've decided that I'm simply no longer going to use the term marginalized. So I hope that's okay with you. I'm not really asking your permission. I'm just letting you know that.
Well, that is the foundation for the reason that I don't use the word ally. I haven't used the word ally in anything I have initiated in probably 15 or more years, because the mindset of the majority of people that I have interacted with who want to be an ally or who identify as allies have this mindset that there's a marginalized group, and we're talking about racism today, right. But I mean in any use of the word ally, because it's like that group of people is marginalized and I can help them,
save them, rescue them.
Right. I can make it better. And so it still keeps me, like, when you look at ups and downs, it keeps me up. Yes. As I'm the person. And so I understand the intention that people often have, right. But personally, I don't use, or I won't frame things from the framework of ally. Now, if somebody invites me to be on their panel and they've named it, what can white allies do? I don't have control over that, and I will work with it. Right. But I don't use initiative for that very reason. Mm-hmm. My spiritual beliefs will not allow me to create the ups and downs.
Yes.
So technically our time is up, but we're gonna go over just a little bit. Because when I asked you, like, what were the reasons that this was so important to you, one of the things that you said was that you believe science of mind and metaphysics and our new thought approach has a unique approach that is needed at this time. And so can you just do a couple of minutes about about what your thinking is for that.
Well, fundamentally, it's because we know how to change consciousness. We know how to change unconscious beliefs. We know the whole process from recognizing that an outer effect is a signpost to an inner belief. And if we don't know what that inner belief is, or that inner mental equivalent or ideation is, that we still know it's there. So we identify that it's unconscious. We know how to begin to explore and bring that unconscious belief into consciousness. We know then how to apply spiritual principle to it and go, well, wait, how is that true? That's not true. We know then how to apply tools and techniques to rebuild, to shift, to use the neuroplasticity in our own brains to change that belief system into a new belief system, which then supports the shift of behavior and the way and the outer forms that we expect actually demonstrate a world that works for everyone. And so New Thought knows how to do that and isn't afraid of doing that and isn't afraid of looking at unconscious beliefs and isn't afraid of saying, oh, wait, well, that doesn't, how would we, what's the spiritual truth here? Well, that's not it. Okay, so what is the spiritual truth, right? And then to go forward and then to ask ourselves, okay, if this is the spiritual truth, what forms are we calling forward to bring that spiritual truth out into being? And so I think that, and again, it's not about fixing the world for those poor marginalized people or assuaging our sense of, well, we really screwed it up for the last 400, whatever, blah, 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 right? We actually know how to do that work. And that's the critical mass shift in consciousness, where the tidal wave becomes so sweeping that, quite frankly, and I'm not sure that I should say this out loud, but I'm going to anyway. Quite frankly, then the work with form is almost not. So I've had this conversation with somebody who said, well, how do we keep fighting for reform? Do you see, when the underlying consciousness structures, when that consciousness sweeps so broadly, the forms will fall as effortlessly as we just go, no. And the new forms will arise. And we have to be ready to do that midwifing work. That's the work in the world and the action. But we don't have to fight against the old stuff, because when the consciousness shifts, the consciousness that was holding that old stuff in place, it's gone. And there's nothing holding those forms in place anymore. And that's what we have to offer. While people are, while everybody's doing their bit and part, right? That's, I think, what Science of Mind and New Thought has to offer to the plethora of things. It's not the only thing that needs to be done, right? But it's to the plethora of things that are being done. That's specifically what I think that we bring to the table and should and must bring to the table. That, I believe, is our responsibility.
So everybody, if you've never been exposed to Dr. Petra Weldes before, you have just gotten a tiny, tiny taste of the wisdom and the love and the commitment of Petra Weldes. And I am so delighted that she agreed to be one of my guests in this live summit, From Hatred to Harmony. Our time is just about up, and actually our time is already up and we went over, but that's a minor detail. My name is Tracy Brown, and I simply want to thank you, those of you who are participating, for all your comments on Facebook and your sharing these videos and other information to your friends and through your network. And please stay in touch with the Facebook page, Stained Glass Spirit, for more information and insight and inspiration about making diversity and inclusion work in our spiritual communities. And finally, of course, I want to thank you, Petra Weldes, for saying yes and for bringing such power-packed information in such a tiny amount of time.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you for letting me be part of it. And I just was saying thank you on my watch party. And so I'm so grateful. Really, really.